The scanner pitched a sharp, accusing beep, and the belt froze under my bread as the cashier's clipped smile stiffened. The loss prevention rookie drifted in with a radio on his chest and a smirk he thought was authority, and my granddaughter shrank inside her hood while fluorescent light bleached the color from our lane. Shoppers stared over glossy carts. The manager's polished shoes stopped just shy of us like we were a spill to step around, and I stood with the cold breath of the freezer on my ankles, the blue folder warm under my palm, watching their policy turn into a stage where arrogance speaks first and dignity is told to wait. I won't raise my voice. I'll raise the record. Timestamps, shelf tag, membership, the senior card my wife once sent it like a photograph, and before the receipt cools in that printer's mouth, I will make their own procedure say my name out loud. Before we continue, please subscribe and check in below. Where are you tuning in? If this hits home, share it so fewer elders carry this weight. The shame started with a small sound. The scanner changed its tone on my loaf of bread, and the belt stopped moving as if it remembered something about me I had forgotten to hide. The cashier's hand froze midair. Her eyes flicked to a square on her screen, then to my face, then to the ceiling camera that wore its dark dome like a judgment. My granddaughter Ava had her hand on the cart's child bar, steady as a little metronome, and I felt her fingers tighten. I could smell citrus cleaner lifting yesterday's spills from the rubber mat, and behind it, the metal-cold breath of the freezer doors. She pressed a key, and the lane light flashed. The beeping from other registers carried on, indifferent. A line built behind us, a soft river of breath and plastic and impatient shoe squeaks. The cashier asked me to wait a moment, in that practiced tone that isn't quite a question. I watched my milk sweat under the bright lamps, a bead rolling down the jug like a second hand. The items already scanned were corralled at the end, bag mouths open like little questions. My cart held the rest: apples and a thin, crinkling bag, cereal, oatmeal, a pack of socks, a small plant Ava said would like our kitchen window. I kept my palm on the cart's handle and my other hand near the inside pocket of my jacket where the blue folder lived. Its cardboard edge had softened over years of being exactly where it needed to be. Inside it were coupons folded on the same lines, old paper receipts with the heat-printed ink turned sepia, my senior card in its stiff sleeve, my proof of address creased at the corner. None of it felt dramatic. It felt like traveling with rain gear on a cloudy day. The cashier reached for her lane phone and murmured something that included the word hold. A small red icon bloomed on her monitor. She pulled my already bagged groceries closer to her side as if proximity conferred authority. A man in a navy vest with a clipped radio turned his head towards us from 3 lanes over. I could hear the refrigerator banks hum their steady choir, and above that hum, a single radio crackle, then the cadence of feet that understand floor plans. Ava looked up at me, chin tucked inside the hood of a sweatshirt. She wasn't afraid. She was trying to be small in a place that wanted to make her feel large and exposed. Her grip stayed sure. I told her we were okay without using a word. That is a grandfather's second language, the quiet vocabulary of nods and breath. The vest arrived. Loss prevention, printed on a small tag. He had the energy of someone repeating a script and hoping the script would save him. He asked the cashier for a number, asked me for patience, asked the air for a reason. The belt stayed still. The lane light flashed again. He gestured toward the returns counter set off to the side, that island of acrylic and clipped pens and rolled tape, where the floor is a slightly different shade because lives get paused there. He said it would be quick.
We moved 3 steps, then 5, to the counter's edge. The acrylic panels threw back everything. my gray at the temples, Ava's dark eyes, the bag sealed, the green splash of the plant, the red line on the floor that marks where a polite distance becomes a boundary. I could smell coffee from somewhere behind the swinging door, and the faint rubber smell of new carts stacked together. A woman at the counter slid the bags even closer to her side and placed a laminated sign between us that said, "In review." The sign wasn't for me. It was for everyone else, to teach them which eyes to use. I traced the environment the way I trace a map before a storm. Camera dome above the belt, angled toward the scale, sight line to my hands, digital clock over the dairy aisle, a yellow price tag on the end cap that would matter if it needed to, the loss prevention vest positioned to see me and the cashier at the same time, the returns clerk's badge name turned inward by accident or habit. Each detail felt like a bead I might need later on the string I was already threading. I placed the blue folder on the counter, but didn't open it. Not yet. The folder had always been most powerful before it opened, a promise that the world could still be clarified by paper. The edge pressed a familiar notch into my palm. The senior card inside had its own particular plastic smell, and touching it always brought back the day I laminated it at the community center, and my wife laughed at how I centered it like a photograph. Behind us, the line sighed and bent around, choosing other lanes. A cart rattled over the grate near the entrance. Somewhere, a toddler laughed, one of those pure, glassy laughs that rise even in the middle of a small drought. I kept my breathing measured. I watched the cashier describe something to the vest with hands that drew a square in the air, then a downward slice, like she was cutting a window from a wall. Ava shifted her weight and placed the plant carefully on the counter's corner. She looked at the lane displays, then at the ceiling camera, then at the clock, her eyes taking pictures the way a field notebook takes impressions, quick, clear, time-stamped by attention. Her sweatshirt smelled like dryer sheets and the fake vanilla lotion she borrows from her mother. I placed my hand lightly on her shoulder and felt the steadiness in that small, straight line of bone that would carry a whole life. The vest asked me to stand by a square of floor tape near the side gate of the counter. The square was slightly darker from other shoes that had learned its borders. I stood there. The air near the freezers seeped under the counter and licked at my ankles. The returns clerk wrote something on a form as if she were filling a field instead of telling a story. The cashier's lane beeped back to life for the next person, who carried 2 boxes of cereal and a set of kitchen tongs, and looked over at me in the sideways way people do when they want to know, but also want to keep their day. I pressed my thumb against the folder's edge and counted the rhythm of the store. Humming, beeping, wheels, radio. A calendar pinned on the clerk's cubbyhole with squares full of ink. A stack of receipts under a clear paper weight with a single copper penny trapped like an emblem. All of it forming a lattice that could hold what needed to be held if someone decided to hold it properly. The vest spoke quietly into his radio, then nodded at something only he could hear. He gestured toward the acrylic gate. The clerk looked at me without looking at me and unlatched it. As the gate swung, I caught the smell of dust warmed by electronics from the little hallway behind, the kind of smell you only notice when you are somewhere you didn't plan to be. I felt the warm weight of Ava's gaze on the side of my face. She was not clutching me, she was anchoring me. I kept my chin level, the way I used to carry fragile things up the steps in the old house we fixed room by room. I thought of my wife's blue folder, how she would press it flat and say, "There is an order to most storms if you find the first page."
A man in a black polo emerged from the little hallway and looked past me to the cashier as if to confirm the story he had been told before he met its subject. His badge hung from a lanyard, his shoes were quiet. He nodded once and pulled the hallway door wider, making room for the cart to follow if it had to. The red exit sign beyond him bled a stain of color onto a beige wall like a low sunrise. I could hear the swish of the automatic entrance doors far away, the outside world doing its ordinary work of letting people in and out. A shopping list skated loose from someone's pocket and lay near the floor vent, crowded with forgotten words, strawberries, rice, tape, soap. My granddaughter's hand skimmed the plant's leaves back into place. The vest shifted his stance to open a path. The returns clerk placed a clear plastic tray on the counter, empty, as if waiting for arguments to be set inside in neat rows. I stood still for one full breath, then a second, and let the quiet choose sides. In that quiet, I could hear the freezer's hinges sigh and the faint click of the clock over dairies stepping into the next minute. Nothing dramatic moved on the far wall, nothing even as loud as a spoon in a mug, and yet everything around me adjusted a degree, like a house settling after a wind gust. When the red light above the little side door flickered on, the clerk pointed, and they told me to step inside. The hallway swallowed sound the way a thick curtain does, and the door side shut behind us with a polite click that felt like a seal. The eye changed immediately, warmer, buzzing lightly with electricity, a faint glue smell from labels and tape. The corridor was narrow, lined with beige that had been beige for years. A hand scanner blinked a small green eye near a side gate. The returns counter continued on the other side of the acrylic, but in here, the world was all registers and forms and that steady hum of machines that count everything. A rolling printer slept under a shelf, its feed of paper looped like a pale ribbon. A corkboard carried schedules, a fire evacuation map, a training sign-up sheet with 3 signatures in the first row and a lot of empty squares under it. The loss prevention vest positioned me on another tape square, this one a dulled rectangle just inside the inner gate. He asked me to wait there. I stood with my blue folder cradled against my ribs and let my breathing find a shape that could fit the space. Ava moved to my side, small and attentive, not touching anything, letting her gaze map angles. She paid attention like some people pray. Her gaze made the room steadier. I registered the clock above the doorway, 2:17. I watched the seconds hand crawl toward the 12, listened to the belt squeal on a conveyor far off, and felt the impatience of a store that does not like pauses. A staff badge swung past attached to a person in a hurry, and I caught the name and lodged it where names go when they might matter. I set the folder on the counter that had a row of clipped pens and a little sign about returns in 30 days with a receipt. My fingertips found a groove in the folder's spine, that tiny scar in the cardboard I could pick out blind. I opened it only as far as I needed to lay the senior card flat and ease out the thin stack of coupons kept by habit, not need. The plastic of the senior card had a faint, sweet smell, like a new deck of cards. The coupons were soft around the folds. I unlocked my phone and opened the store's app. The icon felt almost ridiculous in that room, playful colors in a place built from rules. My name loaded on the membership screen, clean and ordinary. I pulled up my digital receipts and watched the list stacked neatly by date. I scrolled until my thumb remembered where it would be. Last week, the cereal that was on promotion, the butter that always hides low on the screen. I let the brightness climb so the display could be read if anyone needed it. I placed the phone near the card, the paper proof of address under it, a small constellation. The vest radioed a code and listed our lane number. The words sounded like weather reports read through a mouth of marbles. He looked not at me, but around me, checking wherever checked boxes lived in his mind. The returns clerk entered from the main counter, tucked behind the acrylic, and slid my bagged items further from the gate with the back of her hand, quick, practiced. The groceries were mine and not mine at the same time. Ownership turns porous under fluorescent light. A man I recognized from church and from seeing the same small city year after year, reached the acrylic divide. He lifted his hand, a half wave, respectful of the boundary. Delgado, who wore a cap when he mowed his lawn and laughed like he had never been surprised by laughter. He said he had seen what happened on the lane, that it looked off, that he could wait if someone needed a witness. He stood in that patient way of men who have waited in lines that tried to make them forget why their time counted. I nodded once to store him safely in the story. Ava edged toward the acrylic and looked up at the camera dome peeking over the lane like a dark moon. Then she tipped her chin toward the end cap facing our lane, where the yellow price tag for oatmeal hung on a plastic rail. Her eyes asked a quiet question I didn't need her to voice. I answered with the kind of nod my wife used to give me across rooms. Yes, if you can do it without leaving me. Ava took one careful step so that the tag sat clear in her phone's lens and lifted her arm just enough to click one photo. The camera made no sound. She waited one breath and took a second, angling so the clock over dairy floated in the background. She returned to my side with that small brightness in her face that says a thing was done cleanly. I asked for an incident number with my voice steady and slow, because numbers are how facts hold their shape when they travel. The returns clerk hesitated. The vest looked at her, and something nudged him to offer a nod. She pulled a thin form from a stack and wrote at the top with her badge tucked into her palm to brace the paper. Her pen left little valleys along the edge where it pressed too hard. I gave the lane number, the time the belt froze, the sequence I observed. She wrote in neat block letters as if neatness could keep anything from spilling. Somewhere beyond us, the doors whooshed as a family left, the smell of cold air and fried food sliding in behind their footsteps. A cart clacked over a threshold. The room resettled. The vest stared at my senior card as if it might volunteer the rest of my story if he kept his eyes on it long enough. I let him look. Paper should be allowed to perform its full duty. The manager of the floor appeared in the doorway, his polo shirt newly pressed, his expression fixed in that neutral plane that can be read as respect or as distance, depending on who's looking. He scanned the arrangement on my counter, then passed his eyes to the returns clerk, to the vest, to Ava's still posture. He wasn't unkind. He was an archive of policies with a little window looking out onto the afternoon. He asked about the hold indicator, asked whether it cleared, asked whether there was a lane reboot. The clerk answered. The vest gave a summary that arranged my minutes into his own language. I named the membership account open on my screen and slid the phone an inch so the name sat exactly under the overhead light. My thumb hovered over the folder's other pocket. I mentioned the customer pricing policy I had read on their website last week when the cereal ran 2 for 1. I told him I had saved it because I have learned to keep the first page of a rule near the situation it might govern. He looked at the clerk, then at the bulletin board, then back at me. He nodded as if to say a policy is a real thing, but sometimes needs a witness to become visible. He turned and gestured deeper into the corridor where the main back room opened. I could see the edge of a bigger monitor, a screen with multiple squares, each holding a small, squared-off version of the store I knew. One square showed our lane, the belt glossy with overhead light. Another showed the returns counter from a different angle, the acrylic catching reflections like a lake catches clouds. The manager said they would review the footage. His voice wore the calm of routine. He pointed to the inner door. I asked for names for the form already started, and I watched how their pens behaved as they wrote them. The manager's signature looked like a wave that had been taught to sit. The returns clerk printed her letters like a school book. The vest's last name had an unexpected flourish at the end like a fish hook. I asked him to note that my membership was active, my senior card valid, my proof of address current, my receipts orderly. My requests were not questions. They were bookmarks. Ava stood closer now, her shoulder warm against my elbow. I could feel her concentration. She glanced at the clock again, at the camera dome above the lane, and back at the manager. She didn't say, "We are doing this right," but her posture said it to me and to some part of the room that was listening. The manager nodded to the vest, and the vest reached for the latch. The door had weight. I could feel it in my wrist as I pulled it open. The hum from the back room was thicker, denser with electricity. I smelled dust warmed by fans and a hint of printer ink and the ghost of cardboard from where boxes had been broken down. The larger monitor faced a metal table with 2 office chairs that had been designed to be forgettable. Delgado stayed visible through the acrylic, a steady figure in the world where the day was still happening. He lifted a hand again, and I stored that too. The returns clerk slid my bags onto a low cart and parked it against the wall, the gesture clean, the plastic sound small and final. The incident number form waited with a blank line near the bottom that would need a code later. The pen's cap clicked back on with a little pop. The seconds hand on the hallway clock climbed to the 12 and dropped like a tiny hammer. We crossed the threshold. The manager moved to the monitor and tapped the key. The screen changed to the camera above our lane, the angle I had already traced in my head. My cart appeared, then my hands, then the cashier's arm rising, then that small red bloom on the register's display. The image froze on the moment the belt stopped, like a breath held too long, and the room leaned toward it, as if gravity had decided that that was where the day lived now. The manager pointed to the chair, and the vest closed the door behind us, and on the screen my hands hovered over the groceries as if waiting for permission to exist. The still frame held the moment like a lid. My cart stalled, my hands hovering over bread and apples. The cashier's finger pointed at the register screen where a red blot sat like a rash. The manager tapped the keyboard. The video breathed again for a few seconds. Then he scrubbed back and froze it at my wrist, brushing the blue folder through my jacket, a gesture too small for anyone else to notice but me. The room's fans drew a constant thread of air across my cheek, warm and slightly sour with paper dust. The chair under me gave a tired little creak. Ava stood at my shoulder, her weight light and certain, a small gravity that kept me where I needed to be. The manager switched angles. Another camera showed the lane from the side, picking up the silver arc of the scale, the shape of the cashier's shoulder, the green of our little kitchen plant. He muted the speakers, although there wasn't much sound to begin with, just the distant murmur of people buying their days. He leaned close enough to leave a smudge on the glass. The loss prevention vest stood to his left, hands folded, radio clipped to his chest, whispering in a low, constant code. I counted the seconds between each whisper, the way you count thunder to know where the storm is. I placed the folder on the metal table so the seam lay straight. The papery rasp of cardboard made a small sound that steadied me. I took out my senior card and set it in a clean square of light, then slid the proof of address out from under it. I opened the app again and felt the tiny tremor in my thumb that never shows until the room is quiet. The membership page blinked my name back at me, ordinary and undecorated. I breathed on the phone's glass and wiped it with my sleeve, not to polish it, but to give my hands something that looked like care to do. The manager asked the vest whether they had a lane event log. He didn't look at me when he asked. He looked at the monitor and at his version of the world. Times, codes, passed through a maze of yes-no. The vest said he would ask for a print. He pressed his radio and said a string of letters that sounded like a boat hull on gravel. Somewhere beyond the door, a small printer woke with a chirp and then began that busy chewing that always sounds like confidence. Ava leaned in just enough to bring her voice close to my ear without moving the air around our arrangement. I felt her exhale more than I heard her words. The app still had last week's receipt if anyone needed to compare. She glanced at the wall clock above the doorway and then at the corner of the screen where the camera timestamp lived in tiny fonts. She was building a bridge between numbers, the way my wife used to line up recipe cards and oven timers and what the window light said about the afternoon. I nodded without turning my head, the yes of a man still choosing how dignity moves inside a small room. The manager paused the footage again and drew a fingertip across the screen to frame a rectangle around my cart. He asked the cashier's name. No one answered. The vest looked at me as if I might supply it. I could have. I had watched the badge swing and printed the name on the paper inside my mind. But I waited, because this was their room and their camera and their turn to say the thing out loud that had been living in my silence. The returns clerk, who had slipped in and pressed herself against the doorframe like she was trying to become wood, supplied the name. The manager typed it into his keyboard like a safe word. The printer's chewing grew louder. A young associate came through the door with a loop of warm, thin paper. He had the look of someone who had learned all the rules in the last month and believed they would be enough. His name tag was straight. His shoes were quiet. He handed the audit roll to the manager with both hands. The paper unfurled like a delicate ribbon. Gray letters burned into it. Numbers lined up in military columns. The room gained a second heartbeat as the printer cut another strip from its belly and spat it waving into the associate's palm. The manager anchored one edge of the roll with a stapler and ran his finger down the first column. Terminal ID. He wrote it on a scrap and slid the scrap an inch so the vest could see. I let my eyes run the same path. The numbers meant nothing until they did. He traced to the next column. Time open, the exact minute my bread had made the belt hesitate. He wrote that too. The vest pointed at a line that said exception flag and held his finger there like he could pin time. The room's hum grew louder with our attention. Ava edged a half step closer and angled her phone so the faint blue of the membership screen reflected in the monitor's black bezel. The glow found her cheekbones, turned them into small lanterns. She wasn't trying to persuade the room. She was reminding me that the thread we had started at the counter still reached us. I placed my proof of address and senior card next to the paper roll like stones at the corners of a mat so it wouldn't blow away. The manager frowned gently when the roll displayed void. He circled it with a pen, then circled the reopen that followed 3 minutes later. He read the operator field under both, lips moving the way lips do when they don't trust their eyes. He copied the operator ID onto his scrap. The numbers had a surprising music. They were almost kind. They just sat there, steady, not mean, not righteous, only true. I thought of my wife's habit of folding grocery receipts into thirds and clipping them to a note on the fridge about the week's budget. She could create a kind of piece with a pen and a margin. I tried inside to meet that standard. The associate leaned in to see the circle and misjudged the stapler's reach. It snapped open and spilled a few staples on the table. They made a soft ping against the metal. He said sorry in the tone people use when an apology is a training step. The manager waved the word away and kept tracking. He asked the returns clerk to confirm the cashier's badge number from her lane log, and she read a string of digits from a clipboard. The manager wrote those digits below the operator ID on his scrap. The two numbers were not twins. They were cousins who had not met. I felt the shift in the room before anyone gave it a name. It wasn't dramatic. It was as small as when a car's alignment is off by a finger width, and then the mechanic puts it back true. The manager's jaw loosened. The vest's shoulders came down a coin's thickness. The associate took a breath as if he had been waiting to be allowed to have one. I did not move. I let the shift pass through me without changing my posture. The blue folder's edge pressed again into my palm and told me to keep my shape. Ava tapped her screen and lifted her phone so the membership number, my name, and the timestamp on the digital receipt were clear. She brought the phone next to the manager's scrap, aligning the place where minutes live. I heard her swallow. I heard the thick, slow tick of the wall clock behind me. Not in time with the fan, not in time with my heart. A third measure that existed to remind rooms of their responsibility to time. The manager set his pen down, the first surrender he'd made to the fact that the paper in front of him had started speaking a different sentence than the one he walked in with. He reached for the roll again and pulled a fresh length from it, scanning for the next marker that could tell him whether the system had tripped first or a hand had. The returns clerk stepped fully into the room now, losing her shape against the doorframe, and looked at my senior card as if it were a passport. Delgado's cap appeared in the small square of camera that showed the returns counter. He hadn't left. The top of his head was a flag of patience. I could see him shift his weight to the other foot, the way a man does when he means to stand until he is no longer needed to stand. It steadied me more than the chair did. The associate, finally brave enough for a contribution, pointed out a footnote on the audit paper, a tiny line that said, "Session carried over." The manager ran his finger along it, then to the operator line again. He read the operator numbers twice more. He said them softly, not to me, not to the room, but to the ink, as if to ask whether it meant what it meant. I did not answer. I watched the way his eyes changed shape when the question in them ran into an answer it could not move. I thought of my wife's handwriting in the margins of cookbooks, the notes that turned recipes into our own kitchen. I thought of the nights we reorganized file folders on the dining table like we were setting a puzzle and the pieces would eventually forgive us for not knowing where they fit first. I thought of the way she would close the blue folder and pat it, as if it had a pulse. I let the memory settle behind my ribs and make the room easier to breathe. The manager lifted his eyes to me, then to Ava, then back to the roll. His pen made a small dot next to the operator ID. He didn't say what the dot meant. He didn't need to. The pen hovered, then dropped, then hovered again. The vest shifted his stance, not defensive now, not triumphant, just uncertain in a way that looked like the first step towards something better if someone chose to take it. On the screen, the frozen image of my hands over the groceries waited for its permission to move. The audit paper sat under a clean pool of light. The clock over the door ticked, the printer quieted. A slice of cold air found the room through a seam in the door, like a reminder that the store outside still had its own weather. The operator ID on the audit did not match the badge I had watched at my lane. If you're still with me, tap like, drop your opinion in the comments, and share. Your voice pulls more chairs to this table. The room exhaled at the same time I did, a slow release that smelled like warm paper and fan belts. The manager kept the audit roll pinned with a stapler and read its gray lines like a weather map. The loss prevention vest shifted his weight, no longer guarding a doorway, simply existing in the same air as me.
The returns clerk moved from the doorframe to the table and placed the incident form beside the audit, letting the corner of one sheet touch the corner of the other so the story could start to fit together. The young associate hurled himself still, palms flat, eager to be useful without making static. I gathered my small constellation back into neat orbits. The senior card lay square to the table's edge. The proof of address sat under it, the county name visible, the date printed clean. My phone stayed bright with the membership page and the tap-away that would bring up last week's digital receipt. The blue folder's spine pressed a reassuring line against my wrist. I could hear Ava's breath settle into that patient pattern she uses when she is doing math at the kitchen table and the first answer doesn't show itself right away. Her presence filled the space the way a steady light fills corners. The manager lifted the phone on his desk and asked for a number that lived above his badge, the kind of number you don't dial unless you want a different kind of attention. He introduced the situation without drama, just the path of minutes and codes and the operator ID that did not match the badge on our lane. He asked for permission to cross certain wires he usually kept separate: camera review, lane audit, membership verification, pricing policy. The permission came back as a steady hum I could not hear, but I could see it in the way his shoulders unlocked another notch. He scribbled a reference code on the incident form and laid the pen down as if to show it would stay put. Ava slid one photo across the table without touching the audit roll, the yellow oatmeal tag visible, the clock over dairy floating like a pale coin in the top corner. The manager looked at it, then at the timestamp on the camera frame, then back at the photo, and I watched gears click in a way I trusted. The loss prevention vest noted the camera ID in his little notebook with quick block letters, as if his pen needed to stay square to the situation. The returns clerk shifted the incident form to add a line about customer-provided documentation, and I gave the smallest nod to acknowledge that even a single sentence can make a hallway wider. The young associate stepped to the printer and coaxed a summary report from it, a narrower strip with bolder headings, easier to anchor with a clip. He spoke softly to the manager about how the system sometimes carried a session if a lane was suspended the wrong way. Words I recognized not because I knew their names, but because I knew the feeling of something left open that should have been closed. The manager let those words land where they needed to. He circled the footnote about carryover with a single deliberate loop.
I asked with the care of someone setting a dish on a crowded table that the incident form include the details that mattered to time. The minute the belt stopped, the minute we were moved to the returns counter, the minute the inner door opened. I asked that it note the membership screen, the senior card, the proof of address, and the observation that the pricing policy had been relied upon as published the previous week. The manager agreed without performing agreement. He wrote the words down and spelled my last name slowly so the letters would keep their order long after this afternoon lost its heat. Delgado's patience occupied a small square on the monitor, still split into many lives. He had taken off his cap and held it against his hip, not because anyone told him to, but because he came from a long habit of being respectful in places that didn't always return the favor. The returns clerk glanced at the screen, then at me, then jotted "witness available" on her form. The line looked like a handrail. I kept that feeling close. The young associate asked if he should print the store's pricing policy from the intranet, and the manager nodded. The printer breathed out 2 pages in a crisp white that looked new enough to be heard. The policy wasn't an apology. It was a tool. It framed what should happen when a price on the shelf and a price at the register disagreed, and it spoke in a voice that assumed no one in the conversation was already guilty. I placed it beside my phone, let the edges align, and felt a little of the static lift from the room. The returns clerk turned her badge outward again without seeming to notice she had done it, and even that small correction felt like a seam being stitched. She filled the incident number line, checked the box for review required, and added a note about training on voids and reopens, like someone who had seen a leak and knew where to set the bucket. The sign-up sheet on the corkboard with its 3 lonely signatures drifted through my mind. The empty square is now a map of what could be done if a room chose to do it. The manager asked to see the membership screen. I slid the phone forward and let the light wash my name in a way the camera would not have to interpret. He read it aloud into the room, not for me, not for Ava, but for the paperwork. He wrote it again on the incident form, and the letters looked steadier when his pen touched them the second time. He added the app receipt reference number and the last 4 digits of the account, and now the page held more than my presence. It held my standing. Ava placed the second photo next to the first, the slightly different angle catching the lane clock from a truer face-on view. Between the camera's timestamp and the wall clock's minute, the space narrowed to almost nothing. Even rooms that don't mean to be fair understand proof when the minutes look at each other and nod. The loss prevention vest asked in his own tongue for a still frame at the exact second the hold icon lit on the register. The manager's hands moved with a quiet efficiency as he stepped through the frames. The image settled on the red shape blooming like a stop sign. He wrote that second down. He wrote the position of the cashier's hand down. He wrote the cashier's badge number as the returns clerk read it from her sheet. Each line landed in a clean row, and I felt my breathing find a rhythm that matched the rows. I thought of my wife's habit of turning off the stove and then standing there one extra beat, thumb on the knob, letting the click complete a circle in her mind so she could carry the rest of the day without checking the burner twice. I thought about how that little cause was love in a language no one clapped for. I kept my face toward the monitor and folded the feeling into my ribs where it could warm me without burning anything new. The manager called the number above his badge again, this time with the reference code written earlier. He described the audit finding about the carryover session and the operator mismatch. He said the words carefully, not with the edge of accusation, but with the spine of accuracy. He listened for a long, silent moment, and then asked that the summary report and the incident form be saved under that code and that a copy be provided to me upon request. He wrote down a second code and underlined it once. The underline wasn't show, it was function. The young associate clipped the audit summary, the policy printout, and the incident form together with a large black clip. The clip snapped into place with a sound that felt cleaner than the stapler's bite. He positioned the bundle so the incident number showed at the top. He asked whether he should fetch the bagged groceries from the returns counter so they would not be out of my sight. The manager nodded again, and I could feel the room rebalancing towards something that was not yet resolution, but was the floor clearing itself for it. Ava brushed the plant's leaves with the back of her finger, the way you do when you want to reassure a small living thing without startling it. Her shoulders had come down from around her ears. Her eyes were still bright, not with victory, but with the clarity that comes when a puzzle grows an edge. It steadied me again, the way her grandmother's hand on my shoulder steadied me across decades in grocery aisles and waiting rooms and small offices where policy was a person who might or might not show up. The manager stood, not abruptly, but with the slow readiness of someone preparing to move a process from the back room to the place where it had started. He set the clip-bound bundle in front of me and tapped the incident number with his finger so I would remember the numbers in the right order later. He placed a pen beside it and turned the monitor so the still frame of our lane, the frozen red icon, and the clear view of the clock were obvious to anyone who might need to see them again. He nodded to the vest, and the vest nodded back, 2 small movements that looked, at last, like agreement about where the next foot should land. I slid my senior card and proof of address back into the blue folder, pressed the folder closed with my palm until the cardboard side, and placed the phone on top.
The room quieted around that gesture in a way I trusted. The air from the fan brushed the back of my hand. The associate returned from the returns counter with my bags on a low cart and parked it so I could see every handle and knot without turning my head. Delgado's square on the monitor showed him shift his weight again and glanced toward the hallway door, as if he could sense the tide turning even without hearing its name. I took one breath to feel the shape of the plan settle, the papers aligned, the minutes matched, the witness waiting, the policy printed, the number assigned. Nothing loud, nothing performative, just the careful arrangement of a path so the rest of the afternoon could walk on it without slipping. I rested my palm on the blue folder, felt the spine's familiar ridge, and let the calm that came with order take its place inside my chest. Then I stood with Ava beside me and faced the door.
The manager walked first. He didn't raise his voice. He placed the clip-bound packet on the counter where anyone passing could see the incident number at the top, then lifted the in-review sign and set it on the shelf behind the clerk. "We're going to reprocess this," he said, clear enough for the return line and the two adjacent lanes to hear. "We have the audit, we have the policy, we have the timestamps." His words weren't a performance. They were instructions spoken in public. The returns clerk nodded once, like a gavel made from a chin. He turned slightly toward me. "We'll correct the price under the posted policy and apply your membership," he said. "Then to the loss prevention vest, and we'll attach the audit summary and carryover note to the incident." The vest repeated, "attached," and wrote the code on a small pad. You could hear the ink working. The clerk reached for my bags and slid them to the reweighing station, removing the zip ties with a neat twist that sounded like a lid finally opened. Ava looked up at the monitor mounted over the counter and then at the wall clock. There was nothing urgent in her, only an exactness that made my chest loosen. She didn't take a photo. She didn't need to. The store had done that part now. The manager asked the cashier from our lane to step over. She arrived with her hands clasped tight, the kind of posture that remembers rules in the wrong order. He kept his tone even. "We're going to have you shadow with training for the rest of your shift," he said. "We have a mismatch on a carryover that triggered the hold. We'll review the process." She swallowed and nodded. Not shame, adjustment. The vest added, "We'll revisit how the holds are cleared," and his voice lost that tinny echo of a script trying to be a backbone. The returns clerk scanned each item again with a steady rhythm that reset my pulse. Oatmeal, beep. Milk, beep. Bread, beep. She read the yellow shelf tag on the screen and matched it with the printed policy at her elbow. "Price override per posted policy," she said softly, mostly to the record, and pressed a key. The register printed a small correction slip that smelled like warm dust and clean heat. She laid it on the counter, added the incident number beside it, and used a paper clip to keep them married. The sound of the clip closing was the sound of a hinge returning to true. Delgado stepped closer to the acrylic and asked if a statement would help. The manager nodded and slid a simple form through the side gate. Delgado rested the cap on his forearm and wrote with the patience of a man who does not dress stories. His handwriting had weight. It looked like a chair that had held generations. The clerk took the form back and tucked it into the packet beneath the audit summary. On the monitor above us, the security feed kept on spooling the same polite loops of life. Carts, faces, refrigerated doors yawning and closing. The manager turned to the small crowd that had lapped against the counter, people pretending to study batteries and gum. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "We're clearing a hold that shouldn't have carried." There was no theater in it, only a sentence that let air move. A woman with two toddlers exhaled. A man with a tie loosened at his throat stepped forward in his own line. The room didn't applaud. It simply resumed breathing. The vest pulled a folded card from his pocket and handed it to the clerk.
"Training note," he said. "Voids and reopens. Today." He glanced at the bulletin board where the sign-up sheet had waited with 3 names for too long. The clerk added this session in a corner, not as a scold, but as a plan. The young associate hovered with my packet, like a student holding a diploma he intends to earn again. The reprocessing finished. The receipt printed in a smooth ribbon, then another, the customer copy with the membership discount, and the policy correction line as big and plain as truth. The clerk tore them cleanly and placed them face up for me to see, not as proof to the room, but as a mirror where I could find myself again. The manager added a store credit, not as hush, not as bribe, but as protocol when policy is forced to come late to its own party. "We'll review this with the team," he said. And I believed him because the stack of paper in front of us had more architecture than apology.
He asked me to read the incident number out loud. I did. The numbers walked out of my mouth in the right order, and Ava listened the way you listen to a hymn you've learned by standing near it for years. The clerk underlined the number once and slid a copy into the folder's front pocket. I pressed my palm to the folder and felt the old cardboard give that faithful sigh. The cashier stood 2 paces away, not dismissed, not kept, held in the doorway between what had been learned and what would be. She glanced at Ava, then at me, then at the manager. "I should have asked for a supervisor sooner," she said. The manager didn't let the room turn her sentence into a confession. "We will make that step easier," he answered. "We'll adjust the prompt and the training." The words nested into the work they required. The vest positioned himself not at the door, but by the bulletin board, looking at the schedule as if schedules could be taught decency like any other habit. He wrote a small note. It was probably code and time and lane, nothing noble, but watching him write it kept the air honest. The associate rolled my cart an arm's length closer to me and parked it gently, leaving the handles clear. He centered the plant between the milk and the bread without fuss. The plant's leaves trembled once and then remembered how to be still. "Anything else we should include on your copy?" the clerk asked. I told her to add that my membership was presented and accepted, that my senior card was visible at all times, that the proof of address matched what was on file. She wrote each phrase without decoration. Her pen made tidy square letters that would read the same to any future eyes. The manager initialed the bottom. The vest initialed the training box. The associate wrote his initials next to the audit print note, as if a name could promise follow-through. I slid the documents into the blue folder and closed it, the edge aligning with a sound like a book finding its place on a shelf. The folder felt heavier now, not from paper, but from shape. Ava stood so close our sleeves brushed. "Ready?" I asked her. She nodded and squeezed the cart handle with that quiet pride children wear when they have seen process, not drama, do its work. The manager stepped back so we could pass. "Thank you for your patience," he said again, and this time the sentence felt like something returned instead of borrowed. Delgado gave me a quick nod and a half smile that said more than a paragraph. I touched the brim of a hat I wasn't wearing, and he understood. The clerk put the "in review" sign back on its hook behind the counter, but now it looked like a tool put away, not a flag planted. We rode toward the doors. The rubber mats under the cart softened the sound of our leaving. The cold breath from the freezer aisle didn't chase us anymore. It just kept the ice cream solid for whoever needed it next. Ava lifted the plant to keep it from brushing the edge of the cart and held it against her sweatshirt like a baby she wasn't afraid to carry. The automatic door saw us and parted, and the light beyond was the same light as before, which is another way to say the world hadn't changed, only our measure inside it had.
On the exit mat, I paused and felt the weight of the folder and the bag handles, and the attention in my chest calm into a low, clean hum. I thought of my wife at the kitchen table, smoothing a receipt with the side of her hand and saying nothing at all because the paper already said what mattered. I thought of Ava this afternoon, learning, without being taught, how to hold a line politely until it becomes a path. I thought of Delgado standing because some afternoons need a witness who isn't related to the person on the form. The doors finished opening. A small, warm wind came in from the parking lot and dried the sweat on my palm where the folder pressed. I set one foot onto the sidewalk and then the next. The manager's voice carried behind us, not loud, telling his team to meet near the bulletin board after the next break. The vest answered with a single word I didn't catch, but the tone was new. The store returned to its usual orchestra. Wheels, laughter, freezer hum, price beeps. Our cart joined the sound like another instrument that had always been there. Ava said nothing until we reached the curb, and then she said, "Grandpa," just once, the word of a person who has watched the room change its mind and knows what it costs to do that gently. I met her eyes. There was no triumph there, only clarity, the kind that travels. I lifted the folder a little, as if to tip my hat again, and she smiled the kind of smile that leaves all the edges on the world where they belong. We crossed to the car with our groceries and our paper and our ordinary afternoon put back into our hands. I set the plan on the seat, buckled it without joking, and closed the door. The blue folder rested on my thigh, warm from the sun. In the reflection on the car window, I saw a man with his shoulders level and his breath easy, and I accepted him. Let the rule be your first reflex, not your suspicion. Let policy speak before suspicion. Did this move you? Like, subscribe, and say in the comments how you'd handle it with your family. See you in the next chapter.